Welcome to the Public Figure Podcast, where we talk with visionary leaders from small businesses to global brands who are rewriting the future in this revolution of change. Welcome to the Public Figure Podcast. And today I have with me Jeremy Whaley, who I have had the privilege of working together with. He's been one of my clients, and he is the founder of Trade Maestro. And he's going to help me usher through this first podcast because it's quite challenging, difficult. I also think it's kind of, when you feel like you've failed, you haven't failed, it's redirection, but changing things again. And you're asking yourself, why the change? And that's why I brought Jeremy here, because he was one of the igniting factors why, not just him, but several people. So welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you. I didn't even know I ignited it. I just showed up. I said, is this the Become Famous podcast? And you said I changed the name.
Yeah, no, but this summer when I was doing your branding, because I do the branding on helping people expand their circle of influence, you had a podcast called Think Rich Radio, which was in the top 5% globally. And we had a dialogue. I did the branding for you, your wife, and several in your circle. And it was just interesting because I have recently written a book in May, and I met you probably in July. And it didn't go as I had thought. I had written this book for, studied for 3.5 years, writing this book, Fame Revolution. I come out with it. I'm not that excited. Don't even know why. And I'm being hit with various people like you talking about how you don't want to become famous.
I want to stay hidden. Please help me brand being hidden.
Yeah, but it was interesting. I was even in a speaking engagement, and it was Heather. Remember, Heather's part of our group, and she's the head of Women 360. And she just admitted to me, was it like right before Christmas, how she didn't like my book.
Well, that's pretty cool.
No, but it was fine. She didn't like the book because she felt like a lot of the things I was talking about was being shrouded in something that really wasn't what I believed in.
That's why I haven't finished my book, because I let somebody read the intro and she said she didn't like it. So I just quit.
Really?
I thought I told you that story.
Yes, you did.
Great. I think it's great to make your shift. So it's the Public Figure Podcast, which is part of the Public Figure Society, which we've talked about a lot. I think it does fit your branding better. And the only way to truly fail is to just quit and to stop. But picking up the pieces and refocusing, it's one of the hallmarks of success. And I think that you should be commended for that. So I'm proud of you. Well,
thank you. And I'm glad that you're here with me alongside, because it's kind of like I've been delaying, and my producer keeps asking me, when are you going to do your podcast? And I'm like, well, I have to talk about, that I've changed from fame to this, and I've been like bugging people like you and everyone else. And it's almost like I've been on a script that I didn't really believe in. It's like I was doing a song and dance. It's almost like that dancer that has danced the same routine for 15 years, like a chorus line, which was on Broadway for like a decade. And if you're that dancer that does the same thing over and over and over again, do you really believe it? Is it as fresh as it was in the beginning? And so I felt like I was following a script, because when you have, at least for me, when I worked for a company, when you have a brand, you stay on brand and you don't change until you go through a rebranding. And a rebranding is a big deal, right?
Right.
And so you're staying on this script and it doesn't really work. And it was like you, Kenya, several people at the same time. I think I had 6 people that are my clients saying, I'm hiring you in spite of the fame. Branding. And that just made me think. And that's when I had, talked to your wife, talked to other people like yourself. And then what was interesting is what people that actually read my book and liked the book said, the most interesting part of it is the public figure part. So So then what happened was I then was like go into depths of myself and having to lick my wounds in a sense. You know, you've sat there for 3.5 years writing a book and then you come out and you're like, wait, I don't even believe in it. I don't even have passion to sell it. And I feel so bad for everyone that was part of editing it. The design looks beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful book. It looks very nice, very thorough. And,
butterflies.
yeah, the butterflies, like, but it looks like, you know, Andy Warhol, the revolution.
No,
you know?
it is beautiful. It's just that it's like what we're going to talk about, you know, with the regenesis. Society is going through these changes, and fame was a 20th century ideal. And even the early ages of the internet, you know, we've gone through this whole influencer phase, and a lot of the influencers want to be famous, but people like me don't. Like, the fame is the last thing I'm interested in. And there's a lot of people that are like me that need to build their public figure positioning. They need to create influence. In fact, I think it's the number one thing that an individual needs. It's going to be more important than a resume in 5 years. But fame is not the outcome. I don't want the paparazzi. When I think about fame, I think about paparazzi. And that's the last thing I want.
And it's interesting you say that, because someone was laughing at me because I was taking a definition, the actual definition, right? But I didn't want to admit to myself that society has changed so much they're not willing to go back to the original definition, which means just to become known for what you do, right? But and then I'm using fame as this kind of fancy way of inspiring people, and I'm getting all these people repelled by it. And it was like I was supposed to be speaking with my book, and the organizer says, please don't talk about fame. And I said, well, can I talk about credibility and visibility? And they go, yes. But it was just so interesting how it created such rebelliousness. And at the same time, when I'm talking to people, like even yourself, you do need to be visible. You do need to be credible, but you don't have to be famous. And I think that's what happened when I went into myself and really reflected, what is fame and what is it that I have done for the last 20 years? I've helped people expand their circle of influence, and influence is not fame. They're not mutually exclusive, but you can be famous, but you can also be infamous, and you can have no influence, right? Like Kim Kardashian has influence maybe on lipstick, but she doesn't have influence on policy, right? And so what I realized was that I was, and I've been such a word person, so really seeing how the fame probably since July or June is not the right thing. And that has been a tough journey for me. I existed in the sense of just going through the flow with work and then having to change everything and really reconfigure, and also not beat myself up on spending 3.5 years on it. I mean, I've learned a lot, and I can use that because it was through the process I discovered the public figure. No one wants to be a politician. No one wants to be a star. And what is a kind of word that can work that doesn't really have negative connotation? And the one word that came to me was public figure.
Yeah. I mean, influence is the name of the game. Influence is the currency of today and moving forward. It really, the bigger your influence, the bigger your tribe, the more currency you have in that network than you would have paying for paid advertising. That's why everybody who wants to build any kind of a business needs to learn how to build influence. So they become, by default, using your language, a public figure. But very few people want to become Kardashian.
Yeah, and it was, and we have this saying in Norway, "Kjerringa mot strømmen," which means the woman that goes against the stream, like it's going against the stream, and I think that's where I was being, and then at the same time, I didn't want to give up on it because I don't give up, right? And I don't want to feel like sometimes you have opposition and the opposition starts changing, but when you do it long enough and no one's changing and no one's seeing it your way and they are liking you in spite of what you're coming up with, I think that was a big realization, because what Seth Godin goes, when is it the time to quit, right?
Right. Well, I think one of your challenges is you're just so freaking smart. And I have this problem sometimes when I start talking about economics. I'll use language and I'll be very literal because I get it. I understand the language, but the popular, they don't get it. The popular society doesn't understand. They want to know that there's a lot of people that want it. They don't want to understand the intricacies of supply and demand. And in the same way, fame, if you understand the meaning of the word, you were correct. But popular society, what it meant to society, we didn't want.
Right.
So here you are. You quit at the right time. You rebranded. You're repositioning, and I think it's a great lesson for a lot of people running down the wrong road. It's kind of like, sticking with economics. Most economists are terrible, by the way, but they say every economist is eventually right. So if you just stick with it long enough, eventually be right. And I think branders are kind of the same way in branding. It's like, well, if I brand it long enough, eventually it'll pick up. And sometimes you just got to, cut bait and start over.
Yeah. And there was
metaphors that I just mixed.
Yeah, I love it. But what's interesting you say that is that I think also there's a part of you that doesn't want to admit something. So my gut was always saying, and then I'm like, well, I have people that have worked for me on this. I have people that have edited, that have put a lot of themselves into it. And so you're holding on to something and it becomes a sunk cost, right?
Yeah.
And in a sunk cost, you should just let it go, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's, and then what do you take with it? So, dear listeners, I've gone from moving beyond your acronyms, which was my first one, was like moving beyond using complicated language. And then it was moving beyond your tribe. And then I had this great epiphany about fame and looking at society, like seeing during COVID how everyone is learning to do videos. And when you're learning to do those videos, you're learning how to do camera light and action. And I had a client of mine, which was really what got me on the whole fame thing. She goes, I don't want to be a movie star, right? But yet you have to do those components. So that's what made me to take the leap to fame. But what I realized was people don't want the trappings of fame. And it's not, and so that has been a really interesting component. But at the same time, you have to have a digital persona. You're a multidimensional person.
Yeah, I think coming from some of your incredible history working with politicians, it's different because politicians kind of by nature are, relatively narcissistic. They care a lot about being famous, and that's their currency. For me as an entrepreneur, and I'll share this with your audience, if you're looking at business, one of the things that I learned years ago is we have to learn how to fail quickly and get it over with. And I don't want to put a lot of emphasis on that because you're not trying to fail, but you want to find out what's not going to work so you can move beyond it. And, I think that's what you discovered. And maybe you say, I held on a little too long. Maybe it's ego, maybe it's pride, maybe it's just stubbornness, whatever. But at some point you have to keep throwing stuff out and say, if it's not working, if there's nobody taking it, is there something I need to change in the product? Is it the name? Is it the positioning? Is it the branding? What is it? And you just got to keep trying and keep trying and keep positioning, keep changing. And that's beyond fame. That's not a fame equation. You can be a nobody behind the scenes. That's called a success formula. And that's what you're doing by changing your branding. You're saying, nope, become famous wasn't working. All the other things weren't working. Acronyms, beyond your tribe. I still think tribe is a great idea. I mean, I think tribe is actually maybe the best name for what influencers are building, but it's how do you lead the tribe? And
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's public figure.
Well, the reason why I say public figure is because it's legal. Right. There's a legal tie to public figure. Right. And I think people don't realize that anytime you're going out on social media, you are actively putting yourself into the public square. And by doing that, if you suddenly get viral, you get to be quasi public figure. And that means that you have lost part of your personal rights. And I don't think people realize that. And that's one of the things I'm seeing are we all going to be public figures where we lose our private citizenship rights because we're out in that society? And that's what concerns me more than anything with people. You are careless of going out there talking about things, right? And at the same time, you cannot sit and just wait and wait and wait. There's this tension between the two. But I think some people need to learn to be more mindful, and some people need to learn to take more risks.
Yeah.
But it's a dimension that we didn't have to do when we were younger, at least us that are in Gen Z and millennials, not Gen Z, Gen X and millennials. The Gen Zs, they just know this intuitively.
Right. No, I think it's a really fantastic point that you just made. And actually, on an unconscious level, that's exactly why I think I've been reserved. It's like once you go out there, you say, now I've put it out there, but I've put enough out to where it's too dangerous and not enough to really dominate. And that's why I eventually connected with you. Is it's like you've either got to jump in and do it, get over the paranoia, whatever. And I think that what you're doing is fantastic. I think the idea of saying, how do you put yourself out there, protect some of your privacy, but at the same time, create the influence that you need to lead the tribe.
Yeah. And that's what, and I think, I know that you say that a lot of politicians are narcissists. I've been very privileged to not have worked with narcissistic politicians. I've worked with some amazing politicians.
Well, I'm on the outside. I just think all politicians need to be pushed into the ocean.
Well, yeah, but what I learned,
shark chum.
but what I think the thing is, what I learned in politics and working in the entertainment industry, and you've been in the entertainment industry as well, is that we deal with marketing and communications and strategy in a completely different way.
Yes.
And I believe that the tactics and the lessons and the way that you intuitively learn about those things in those industries is what the rest of the world needs to learn.
Yes.
And I think the more you know that, the better you are. Like, for instance, in politics, you have a chief of staff that actually takes the time to manage your presence out there with a communications director. You have a speech writer. Like, a lot of times, I think this is changing now with AI, because AI can become your speechwriter, right? Like, we have these people, taskmasters that we're hiring. So like every one of us is being pushed to be a public figure because tasks are no longer viable. I was doing an interview with David Berman Scott. You probably know him from Tony Robbins. He's a mentor of mine. And he was just saying how, if your job is built up of tasks, either A, you have to find a way to integrate it in such a way that you become the conductor so that you do not lose your job. But if you focus so much on just holding on to being the taskmaster, you are no longer going to make it. Your job is going to go to AI. And I think this is where all of us are being moved up to being either the music producer, the orchestra, or I like to say public figure. And in that component means you have to hire people to help manage what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm trying to remember the name of the author that wrote the book, 1 Million Followers in 30 Days or something like that. You remember that?
Oh, wow. Yes, I've heard of it. I've not read it.
I can't think of the author's name, but he took the same theory, and his experience was helping market Taylor Swift. And then he decided as a person, as a private individual, what if he used the same tactics? And he built 1 million followers on Facebook in 30 days. Using the same principles of what you just described. So you're just taking the same philosophy and you're saying, how do we apply it on a larger scale of influence? And he did it for social media marketing. But I think it's great. I think you're right. Politicians and the entertainment industry, specifically on the artist side, I worked on the production side, but on the artist side, yes, they understand publicity. And that's what you're really talking about. That's what politicians are so great at. And what you're saying is the individual, people like me, the individual business owner, running an online business, or, it can be honestly a flower shop. You still have to, at this point in society's history, you have to learn how to create influence. And that means you're going to need a publicity team, for lack of a better word, or learn how to be part of the public.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, if you're seeing just right now in politics with Trump and with him winning the election, is you're seeing it's the people's era, and everyone has an influence. So, like, when they had a bill right before Christmas, they wanted to pass with all of this extra crazy stuff, like the bill was like this high, and people are protesting, and they protested, so it went down to here. It's the transparency society, and it's like either all of us can have thumbs up, thumbs down, we can swipe, we all have power, and more power than we've ever had. And I think it's interesting, after the election, I like to look at all sides. How are people communicating? What are the talking heads saying? Is that what you're seeing is you're not really listening to the CNNs or you find people that resonate with you. And what I thought was so fascinating is, like, what's it called? Pundit.
Pundit?
Yes. They are acting like a television show. Like, they have interviews, they have a studio, right? And so you've all of these citizen journalists taking this medium and professionalizing themselves, so you can't tell the difference between someone that's from CNN and someone that's Gateway Pundit. It's really professional, and I was really surprised by that. And that's why public figure is so important, because all of us can have that microphone, all of us can make that change. And most of us will feel like we're irrelevant when we're on social media. Like, I have some clients like, well, I have no likes. And I was like, well, let's change the strategy a little bit. We changed the strategy. And this week when he talked to me, he's like, oh my God, I got 30,000 likes on a comment, right? You have to, so you can suddenly go from zero to hero.
Yeah. And you really just articulated the entire transition, really, since COVID. I mean, COVID was the death knell for media. And I don't think the public, or I should say the mainstream media, has figured it out yet. But 2020 transitioned everything. It was like such a historical marker. And it had much less to do with COVID than it just did with society hit that mark. And here we are 5 years later, and it's exactly what you said. There's social media influencers right now who could go live and have a 10 times larger audience in 20 minutes than some of the biggest names on network news could have had even 6 years ago. And that's just a complete transition. So Gateway Pundit, they're doing it, but it's not just, look at someone like Glenn Beck, who left Fox, and with his Blaze network, which is a OTT network, it's over the top, goes through Apple TV and Roku and, distribution outlets of that nature. He has as much influence at this point as Fox News does. And nobody in mainstream media wants to admit that. But the beautiful thing about that is it means that a person like myself, or a person like you, or anybody who's listening to this podcast or watching it, they've got all the barriers removed. You can also go do that. I've watched people with terrible video that go out and build a social media following, and they'll have 150,000 people in their live stream. And they do it week after week after week. That is incredible influence. And so that's what you're talking about. Now that these barriers to entry have completely been destroyed, we have great freedom, but with that freedom comes great responsibility. What do we do with it?
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because when I was interviewing for my book, a friend of mine, her name is Ingvild, and she had a daughter, and she says, I'm so sad. My daughter will never know what privacy is. Right? It will not know. We have, but then at the same time, I interviewed an author, my first author, that I wrote this book, this one here, Lovely Brenner. She's written this is her 10th book, and it was her first English book. And when I asked her about it, she says, well, what's so exciting for the young generation right now is the power they have.
That's right.
And she goes, when I talk to these young people, they are like asserting themselves and challenging. And we would never do that. I mean, you were learned to be quiet. You were learned, like for me, I've been behind the scenes most of my life, speechwriter, writer, brushing people up to look good. Kind of like when you were in the music industry, you're brushing up the musicians. We were never taught to be out there front. And then suddenly now we have to be out there. And the younger generation is just usurping themselves. And so a lot of these young internet kids are millionaires.
Yeah.
And are totally hacking the system.
Everything has changed. And that's what I'm saying is, 30 years ago, however long it's been now, mid-90s, whenever I started in the music industry, if you wanted to be successful, you had to have the whole publicity team. You had to have a record label. You couldn't get into the distribution outlets. You couldn't get your music into Walmart and Best Buy and all that stuff. All of that has changed. Today, anybody with a relatively decent laptop and Logic can produce a decent sounding album, distribute it on their own through social media. All those barriers to entry have been gone. The same thing for authors, same thing for filmmakers. And so the gatekeepers are basically destroyed. And that old institution that basically ran entertainment for almost 100 years, it's gone. It's disappearing along with many other institutions. That's why, we've talked about the fourth turning. We've talked about all this stuff coming to a close. You're watching it. This is all playing out, and it's really cool. One person can say, well, I hate that my kids aren't going to ever know privacy. And at the same time, you flip it over and they say, I can't believe my kids will never know the barriers to success that I knew. Which one is it? You give one, you take one. It's like the broken window. It's basic economics. There's always the forgotten principle, forgotten man, forgotten principle, whichever one you want to look at here. You give one, you let one go. You can have anything, you just can't have everything. You can't have privacy and low barriers to entry. You can't have low barriers to entry and have extreme privacy. But, which one do you want? And society has chosen to go the social media route, and I think it's great. It's a lot easier to be successful today than it has ever been.
It is in some ways, but in other ways it's not. So like in my position, having a reputation and having a reputation of working behind the scenes, your circle was small enough that you could roam around and build yourself up. That's kind of gone right now. A lot of the people behind the scenes, if you really want to expand yourself now, because the market is so disruptive, it's harder for you to make it.
I think my perspective on that is that's coming from somebody who's got experience working it that way. So that's what you know. But the new generation who doesn't know that, never see that as something that's missing. So, what you kind of describe is like the good old boys club, which, I'm from Tennessee, where we created good old boy clubs. In DC, you've got that. It happens on the internet too. I mean, it really does. But the big thing that's changed, and I've been preaching this for 10 years, and my former business partner, he never could get it. What I was saying is we're not in competition. You keep thinking we're in competition. That was a 1995 mantra. In 1995, it was about how much bigger can Sony be than, Magnavox or whoever their competition was. And, people want to carry that forward. But in what I do, which is online content, it's actually more powerful to collaborate with people. It's actually more powerful to work with someone like you and say, well, how can we help each other? Instead of feeling like I've got to win, you've got to lose, how can we both win? Right. And this is what social media did. Yes, it removed all these barriers to success. It also destroyed the idea that one competitor has to win. And it turned it all upside down to where we say, we can both win. We can both be equally successful. Yeah. And let's go do this together. It's created more collaboration, more community. I think it's great.
Yeah, no, I think it's smart. And if you are online, and I do believe that's the one thing people needed. And that's what I say about public figure is it is merging who you are with what you offer. Right.
Yeah.
And so it becomes this one. And I do believe the one thing people need to learn more about is you are a product and you are a person. So if you look at in the 90s and moving up into the 2000s, you have Jim Stengel, who wrote a book called Grow. He was the former CMO of Procter & Gamble and absolutely made Procter & Gamble so successful just by going back to the purpose and treating a company like a person. What's the purpose of the company? What is this, right? So corporate started taking the personal, and that was like ingenious, right, with his book coming out. And then we as people right now need to learn from companies to be more like companies, looking at ourselves as a product. And I think will help people not to feel like they're being used, because I do believe a lot of people like, oh, people are just using me, this and that well, there's a part of you that's supposed to be used right now because it's a product. And that's what I think. When you've been in the music industry, when you've worked in politics, you learn that nuance and are able to navigate it naturally because I've been around it for so long. But people that haven't been, they have a really hard time with that. And I think that's a mental shift. I do believe older people will need to learn, like the millennials and the Gen Xers. I think the younger generation just know that they're curating their branding. Like my niece totally curates her stuff. She goes from one Instagram account to the next one. She's changing her branding, right? And knows that she's kind of like a product. But I think we and the older are not. And I think being intentional that I'm a product, I'm a person. There's a part of me that needs the followers. There's a part of me that needs the hard numbers that's tied to me as a brand. And then also not lose the personhood, because if you lose the personhood, you lose your authenticity. And I think that's what happened with me with Become Famous, was that when you don't believe in something, you lose your authenticity in it. Right. And so I could see that in some of my episodes when I'm interviewing, I was losing listeners and not that interesting because I didn't put my whole full authentic self into it.
Right. Yeah. That's the other thing about this age that we're in, call it the public figure society, but it's really about the public square. That's what X has done. It's what True Social's done, is creating this transparency. Just talking about what Trump's done really well, what Elon Musk has done really well. Elon Musk goes out there and he's on X every day, letting the world know what he thinks. And he doesn't do it. Sometimes he's funny, but it's not in a pompous way. It's just, hey, this is who I am. It's all about authenticity. What I do appreciate about Trump, whether you like him or don't like him, what I appreciate about him is, like today when we're recording this, he sent out, I guess it was on True Social. I saw copies of it, but, he sent out his policy for Vladimir Putin. Rather than doing everything behind closed doors, it's like, hey, this is what I think. And he just sends it out there. And people think, oh, well, he's just a pompous ass. Well, actually, he's brilliant. He's telling the people, look, this is what I told Putin. Either get out of Ukraine or you're going to have hell to pay. Which one do you want? Hell's not going to be very good if I'm here. And, sure enough, in a week, this whole thing will be wrapped up because everybody's scared to death. Nobody knows. But that's part of his aura. That's what actually makes him really effective, is he scares the crap out of people. And he's like, well, I'm going to change the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And people are like, what a narcissist. It's like, but he's getting stuff done. And it skirted all sorts of problems with laws that were tied to the name, the Gulf of Mexico. And now,
the reason why he changed it was because Biden stopped him from drilling.
Exactly.
And so he changes the name so he can drill. I mean, it's like brilliant. He never mentions that, but it's even if you like him or not, it's a brilliant tactic.
Right. But my point is, he did all of that in the public square. And that is such a radical move and I hope that this is actually the future of politics, because how many things did Biden or Obama or every other president in my lifetime do that we didn't know what they were doing? And next thing you know, laws changed and they're trying to enforce them. And we're like, when did this happen? Oh, it was, at 11:59 p.m. on Christmas Eve when Congress did this thing and nobody knew about it. Well, Trump's not doing that. He's saying, no, it's all out in the public. And that was kind of my point, is the beautiful thing about social media is transparency. And because of that, it demands authenticity. And as you and I have talked before, authenticity is so much greater than perfection. People think they watch stuff on TV, they see the actual famous people are about perfection. They're about covering every flaw and putting out the inauthentic self so that people think they're perfect. Social media in 2025 is about authenticity, which is the opposite of perfection. It's about being who you are, being raw, letting people see the flaws. And if you don't have any flaws, then you're just, darn near perfect. But, everybody sees it, so you sneeze and people don't care. You look down at your phone in the middle of your podcast and people are like, oh yeah, he's real. She's real.
Yeah.
That's today.
No, I was looking at my phone because I wanted to remember it's Latvia. They almost 10 years ago had transparency of online voting and everything is open. And people were horrified by it, absolutely horrified by it at that time. But now they're kind of the role models.
Yeah.
And it's very, What do you think is going to, and we're going to be talking other things. It's really exciting. Jeremy's going to be coming on regularly, and so is his wife with these great insights. But we're going to have another episode, the next one, which is really the basis of why public figure. But to come to a close for this one, yes, we changed from fame. If you could give me 3 things you don't like about fame, what is it about fame? I would love, no, I just think as kind of putting an end to fame, and I think there is this sense of you need to become visible and credible, but you yourself don't want to be famous, but you want to be credible. So what do you not like about fame, and how is that space of yours going out there?
Well, this is subjective. This is my opinion. I don't know what
I'd like to hear your opinion.
I have always been a relatively private person. I'm a pretty introverted person. People who hear me talk, they would never dream that. Ironically, some of the best performers in the world are some of the most introverted people. It's a side note, but yeah. So I think that's a big part of it. Is I just am not one of these people that is overly wanting to be public. And so even the very word fame just rubs me wrong. It's like the last thing I want to do is be famous. Like I know I need to be out on social media, making a bigger splash. I know I need to create influence, and I do want to have influence. Most people want influence because influence is currency. When you have influence,
but you think fame is not currency? Because I was putting in my book, and I don't really believe it now, but in a sense, and I call it the fame economy, but it's really not the fame economy. It's maybe the influence economy.
Yeah. Okay. So let's use this metaphor. When you think about Tucker Carlson, who's fairly well known, but when you think about Tucker Carlson, actually, that's probably a poor example. Let's go with Joe Rogan. When you think of Joe Rogan, who's been a successful actor, he's been a successful comedian, but his big thing has been his podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience. He's got incredible influence. You look at Elon Musk, who, yes, he's well known, but he's got incredible influence. Trump went on and had how many million people? It's like 150 million people on his live stream with Elon. That's incredible influence. People are paying you with their attention, which is the #1 currency in the world. Contrast that with the cover of National Enquirer. And, what I grew up with was the headlines of Michael Jackson and, what color is he today? Did he have his skin transformed? Oh, there's Jim and Tammy Faye. Oh, there's Tammy Faye's special guy. That's what I associate fame to. It's the cover of National Enquirer. Then there's the picture of, Taylor Swift is actually an alien with an elephant nose, and her butt got cut off in the, departure from the ship. I mean, it's like, it's stupid. And right. That's what fame is. Fame is shallow. So for people who want true authenticity or true influence, the last thing that we would want to associate with is shallowness. Let me use a different metaphor in terms of words.
Wow, that is really powerful. That I didn't even think about that. Here I am trying to create depth to fame, but really the impression people have of fame is its superficiality.
Right. It is superficial.
Right.
Yeah. I'll use a similar metaphor just based on what I do, because I teach a lot of stuff related to stock market. And media has associated 2 words with the stock market: greed and fear. And they say that these are the 2 emotions that drive the stock market. And years ago, I identified that greed is not even an emotion. Greed is a state of the soul. But just today, I was on a coaching call with somebody, and he'd made a terrible trading decision, and he'd done really, really well. And then he lost all of his money on all the profits he'd made on one trade. And I said, "What do you think happened?" And he said, "Well, I got greedy." But I knew it wasn't true. He didn't get greedy. But in his mind, he associated the term greed to it because the media has implanted that idea. So as we broke it down, I had to go all the way through the mindset and reconstruct this to realize that what he really had was the emotion of extreme optimism. Now, you might think that we're being semantically different here, but we're not. On an unconscious level, if you're not a greedy person, nobody can make you greedy. So if you take actions that you associate with greed, guess what your unconscious mind is going to do? It's going to self-sabotage. And it's going to prevent you from having the success because on an unconscious level, you think success is greed in the financial space. In the same way, for a person like me who has no desire to be shallow, no desire to be famous for the sake of being famous, fame is shallow. It doesn't matter if it's what it is by a textbook definition. What we associate to it is fame has no depth. Therefore, I will always sabotage my fame. I will always sabotage my success. And so what has to be flipped in the way that I've been trying to think about it is to create influence so that I can authentically influence people and I can actually contribute to them. Actually, me becoming the most influential person that I can be is the greatest gift that I can give society because I know that I have things of substance to share. That's the opposite of fame. Fame doesn't have substance to share. Fame is the movie star that goes out there and says, oh, I'm going to vote for such and such because they wore these sneakers and they're not a communist. But I think I might be a communist, but I don't really know because I'm just a Hollywood knucklehead and I love fame. We don't want that. You know, people don't want shallow fame. And that's why it doesn't work.
It's so interesting you say that because I, being more of a philosophy-oriented person, I was not allowing that in. I was like thinking, well, it means this in the old English language or, in the dictionary of Cambridge, right? But you're right. I think that's why people have been so protesting it when I talk about it, that we all need to become famous. I think some people, they don't want to be shallow.
Yeah. Words change over time.
They do.
Meaning changes. And it's like Tony Robbins always says, language has meaning. We have to be very careful in our use of words. It might have a textbook definition over here, but over time that definition evolves. When I was growing up in the 80s, we would say something was bad, and what we really meant was it was really cool. That was stupid, but it's what it meant, right? One time I tried to name a company with the name Uber in it, and it had to do with trading. It was Uber Trades, and somebody advised me on branding and said that Uber would be associated with German, and it was tied in with Nazism. They're like, well, everything was Uber in Germany and you don't want to use that word. Well, fast forward just a few years and Uber is one of the number one vehicle car sharing services. Who cares about the word Uber? And that person who gave me that advice, it was actually a really great name, Uber Trades. It would have been a great name. But of course we ran away from it because we let somebody else influence us on the meaning. It really just means extreme, right? For us today, just extreme. So you have to really look at what a meaning is today and apply that.
Yeah. And how do we, what would your advice be on how do you keep up to date with that? Because it just seems like things keep changing so fast. And suddenly one word that you've said all your life, you can't even say it anymore. And you're like, wow, how did that happen?
Well, that has never been more true than in 2025.
Yeah.
I would say get a few teenagers because they have really stretched my language.
I know. They
really
what
Sigma
do.
is?
Sigma?
Yeah, you know what Sigma means?
No.
I don't either, but my kids use it all the time. It's apparently
Riz, charisma.
Yeah, Riz. What is this?
Means you got charisma.
Well, sometimes it means that. They change the meaning though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they change it all the time. So Sigma is this new one, and I actually don't know what it means. I thought it was a Greek letter of the alphabet.
It's interesting. Well, I want to say thank you for coming on for my first podcast on public figure, which is my number 78, which is kind of exciting. Done it for 4 years.
Well, I want to say congratulations on your consistency. And if your listeners and your viewers can take one lesson, it's this. Don't ever, ever quit. Keep reinventing yourself. And I want to commend you publicly, Torund. I'm proud of you. I haven't known you that long. I've known you for about a year, maybe. But I'm really, really proud of you for just pushing through, going through the metamorphosis, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Well, thank you. And we're going to say thank you for this first episode. And we're going to continue to explore not just on public figure side, but on the technologies that are influencing the society right now. And what are the frameworks that are going to be, and interviewing key people in this, from people that are working in AI, from people that are even in traditional medicine or new medicine. Really, what are the new things that are really going to influence our society? So stay tuned, my friends. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in to the Public Figure Podcast. Stay ahead and keep rewriting the future.